Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and my Zoom attendees. You're all welcome to be here today. We are so glad to have you attending the session for Guyana Mental Health and Wellbeing Conference 2021. I feel honored to introduce today's speaker, Ms. Raiza Khan. Raiza Khan is a Guyanese counseling psychologist. She pursued her tertiary education in Canada, receiving her diploma in social work in Toronto, Canada. She later went on to receive a double major honors degree in Latin American and Caribbean Studies and Psychology from York University. Degree in Latin America. She returned to Guyana in 2013 and has since worked with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and many local NGOs such as Red Band Aid Foundation and the Global Shapers. She then pursued an MSc in psychology at the University of West Indies and graduated with distinction. Currently, Riza has her own private office, Anira Counselling and Psychology Services in Georgetown, and continues her work with local organizations in promoting mental health awareness. So, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Ms. Raiza Khan.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you, dear. So this morning we're going to be doing child abuse. I think the title on the paper on the schedule says child abuse and mental health. So what we're going to be looking at specifically is understanding emotional abuse and their impacts through the lifespan of an individual. So I always like to do this where I like to ask questions. That's not all about me just talking, but what do we think of when we think of child abuse? Like what comes to mind? Right. Anything that harms the child, socially and emotionally, right? Physically. Anything else? Could just be one word. Okay. Go that over. I have licks. Yes, thank you. I got that from Mr. Will Campbell here visiting us. Very nice to see Will. Yeah, licks. Definitely. I think we underestimate the emotional impact of a physical punishment, such as licks or corporal punishment or beatings wherever you are around the world. Right. So, forms of child abuse, we do have physical, emotional, neglect, sexual, and in medical. And people are like, why medical? Where does this come from? Anyone here ever heard of Munchausen syndrome? Munchausen syndrome is what happens when a person is constantly going and either emphasizing or falsifying or escalating their medical concerns for some type of incentive, whether it's emotion, attention, or whatever the case may be. Now, when that happens in your parent, there's something called Munchausen by proxy, where you're doing the same thing to your child. Anyone ever heard of the Gypsy Rose Blanchard and Dee Dee Blanchard case, where Dee Dee Blanchard experienced, we can say, hypothesized, that she experienced Munchausen by proxy, whereby she had her child for decades and decades taking hundreds of pills and medication tests, falsifying her medical experience for whatever it is that she was trying to attain, attention, whatever the case may be. So medical can also be a form of abuse. Right. So the shorthand of it is emotional or psychological, creates when an adult who's caring for a child judges, threatens, puts down, or rejects a child or teenager, withholding love and affection so the child feels bad about themselves or worthless. That's a baseline top Google definition of emotional abuse. The other topic we're going to talk about is CEN. CEN is something that is very popular in Guyana. You may not recognize it as being CEN, but childhood emotional neglect is when there's a consistent pattern. This is not a parent who's just, oh, I'm just too busy, I'm just too tired. This is a consistent, sometimes even calculated attempt to withhold or failing to meet the emotional needs of a child. A pattern over time where they lack meeting that emotional needs leaves the child with deep insecurity and it affects them throughout their lifetime. Now, I want to premise this with the second point here, which I think is really important because in Guyana, we have a lot of reasons why we try to discredit mental health. Oh, well, the child being taken care of and the child going to a proper school and look how much Nike shoes they got and watch a nice car and they got pick up and they got drive and all this thing, right? So the reality is you can still be emotionally neglected while having your basic needs and sometimes even above basic needs being taken care of. Um, and so people like, oh, rich people ain't got mental health problems. Well, yes, they do, because you can have a nanny taking care of you 24/7 and you have absolutely no relationship with your parent, whether mother or father. So in that case, your emotional needs are not necessarily being taken care of. You just have a nanny who watches you and cleans you. Right. So examples of CEN, a parent will consistently, like we said, ignore and dismiss. This is dismissing, discounting a child's feelings or even what their distress. And you'll see some of this on like TikTok. Like there are some really great TikToks out there explaining CEN in very educational ways. I'm not on TikTok, but I do see them sometimes. Demeaning a child's emotions with phrase like cry a baby and yeah, thanks. And refusing to listen to child's feelings in general. So what we also thank you. What we also see, and I wanted to definitely add in this because it did come up when I was doing my research, and I think it specifically relates to Guyanese in general, which is stop crying, or I'll give you something to cry about. Who here has heard this? Not necessarily. Don't disclose. You don't have to disclose if it was to yourself. But I've heard it definitely being told, like your neighbors, you're playing, that kind of thing, and somebody's mother will shout, "Don't be crying! I'm coming down there, make you cry, give you something to cry about." Right? So this, as much as you're thinking, why is that a problem, Riza? A, it's a threat. Second of all, it's disregarding what is triggering your child to cry to begin with, right? So um, it also teaches a child that emotions are wrong or unimportant. If every time you tell somebody, ouch, this hurts, and the person keeps ignoring it, you're never going to tell that person, ouch, that hurts. Because why? You have learned from the time you're a small child that that person doesn't care if it hurts, right? And we'll see we're going to look at the long term and at present way in which CEN and emotional abuse impacts people. What are some other hurtful things that are said before we get into the examples? Because I got a whole lot. What are some of the examples of maybe hurtful things or things that you think might be problematic that we have said to children? I'm sorry, sir. Oh, yes. I'm sorry I had you. Definitely. Thank you. We will come back to that for sure. I'm sorry I had you. You're stupid. Yes. Thank you. Definitely. That's very hurtful. Like your father. Like your father. Yes. And what does that tell a child? Like, okay, think about it. You hear one person going on and on and on about how bad somebody is. And then at some point in time in a blowout argument, well, you're just like that person. What does then that say to you? Oh, so if my mother or father thinks I'm just like this person and all they ever do is criticize that person, then they must assume I'm just as bad, right? So what does that implant into a child's brain? Thank you. Whatless or worthless. Yes. Man, you're too worthless, man. And you see that, especially for my islanders watching. It's such a common thing to tell people, like spending time with Jamaicans, for example. I don't want to call it no island in particular, but Jamaicans will very happily be like, you're worthless, man, you're worthless. So again, how it's so interesting how we've normalized into just conversation. And I don't know if you guys ever noticed how negative and aggressive Guyanese language is in just the most common interaction. It's very aggressive and very negative, and we just kind of see it as, oh, you're just rubbing people, you're just rubbing people. Well, I've definitely been someone who experienced a lot of rubbing as a teenager, and it definitely had impacts on me when I was a teenager. So thank you. Thank you for those examples. They're really good, and trust me, they come back up. So, what are some examples of emotional abuse? So, we have not allowing children to express their views and opinions. I put that at the top, not that these are in any specific order of intensity, but why? Because I think it's such a common thing that we just do not listen to our children. I'm the adult, you're the child. Children are to be seen and not heard, and don't speak until spoken to. Those are some of like the three main themes that I think we've grown up with. And my theory is that some of our old, I guess, folklores or folk sayings or Creole sayings have contributed to generations of voicelessness again, in my opinion. And that's what I've seen every day in my office, right? So when we disregard their emotions and views, we don't create that space for our children to want to talk about more serious things. If your child can't even say, "Hey, I did macaroni art today, and I'm so proud of myself," or "My teacher said I did such a good job," and you're just like, "Okay, cool, thanks. I'll put it in a box." Like you don't even praise your children. I have grown adult clients who don't even know what the feeling of proud is because the thing is, you have to have that validated to some degree, in the sense that if you're having this warm bubbly feeling inside of you and someone doesn't say, "Oh, I'm so proud of you," you'd be like, "Oh, that's what that feeling is. It's pride." But if no one says it, then you're just like, "Well, I never really knew what being proud felt like," if that makes sense. Ridiculing what they say, silencing them, shut up, or shouting over. That's definitely something we see again. I'm the parent, you're the child. I know best, you don't know. I've experienced life, you haven't, right? Frequently shouting or threatening them, Lord, good Lord. If we had to call CPA, but every time we heard some shouting by our neighbors, CPA would be like literally on the ground every week, right? um, Mocking the way they are or how they communicate. And we see this specifically in cases of children who are differently abled. So, children who may have speech impediments, children who might be on the autistic spectrum, children who might have ADHD. We definitely see this in this case where the parents don't understand the diagnosis because they have not been diagnosed or they have not been treated. And they'd be like, "Come, man, talk properly, man, talk properly. How you can talk so?" And so we tend to get that kind of very impatient response to children who may have undiagnosed other medical or mental health conditions. Um, Giving silent treatment as a punishment. Now, we see this especially in narcissistic relationships, but we can see it as well in narcissistic parental relationships, whereby it is not just, "Oh, I'm pissed at you," but I know that this silence really hurts you, and I'm going to intentionally keep doing it just to hurt you. And that's where that line is with the abuse, is the intention, as Michelle said, the intention to harm. And sometimes, like I said, it's not always calculated, which we'll come to. Limited physical contact. You don't hug a boy child, it will make them soft. Hands up if you've ever heard this. I can't see the Zoom, but hands up if you ever heard this. That is the most distressing thing I've ever heard. Actually, no, it's not, but it's definitely up there because as a psychologist, we know we've heard some distressing stuff, right? But it is so distressing. Imagine first of all, being gendered, having affection gendered, right? Like that in itself is just wrong as someone who believes in human rights and equality, first and foremost. But to then assume that hugging a child will make them soft, and then what's wrong if we make a boy soft? Like there's so many things wrong with that statement. And it really does have repercussions. Anyone ever heard of attachment theories? Attachment theories, right? So, anyone ever heard of the twin studies back in the 70s and the 80s and the 60s? America loved doing twin studies. They loved twin studies. The behavioral psychologists, the experimental psychologists, social psychologists. So, what they would do, they would split twins up and they would give one twin a ton of emotion, emotional support, love, and hug and attention. And then they would not do the same with the other twin. And you can literally see in the old footage and stuff where the other twin who's being neglected, you literally see how it starts to impact that child's concept of well-being, concept of trust. Because if anyone knows, Eric Erickson's first level of stages of development is trust versus mistrust. And you can see how that child starts to become further and further attached, or further, so either anxiously attached or avoidantly attached. So if you're ever interested in attachment theory, you could definitely look for experiments in America and, well, globally actually. Right. Continue. You're no good. You're a mistake. Oversharing. Now, anybody who has watched my lives know that I love to talk about the how destructive oversharing is by adults. What do I mean by oversharing? Including your child, child under 16, 18, so on, into adult discussions, adult information, sharing, oversharing. Oh, what's happening between you and your spouse, their father, their stepfather, whomever. Oversharing is also a major issue in Ghana. Why? Because most of the times the information that's being shared, those persons feel alone and trapped and isolated. So the only person they can really talk to is their children or their child. God forbid is an only child, poor thing, right? Nowhere else to go. So what happens is that oversharing is bringing a child's mind into adult material that they just don't know how to process. Always ask yourself, always ask yourself, is what am I going to tell my child? Do they know how to handle it? Do they know what to do with it? And why am I oversharing it? Or why am I sharing? What am I hoping to get from oversharing that with that person? And the oversharing actually does have implications, which I'll talk about as well. Um, Saying things like, you're a mistake, I should have aborted you, I was going to abort you, I should have left you on the doorstep of the neighbor, all of that stuff. Yes, oh, trust me, we've heard things out the woo-ha. And so these are really, really terrible things. Can you imagine going along in your life thinking you've got, like, you got some love and attention and affection, and you got a good relationship, and all of a sudden your mother just busts out, I should have aborted you, I should have get rid of you. Then you're like, so what is this existence? Why have I been around? And it does definitely complicate something, and it leaves a child with lots of longing questions that you clearly don't probably have the answers for, nor did you think about that. You did not think of the consequence when you said that to that child. Preventing normal social interactions with peers and others. I know you might be thinking, oh, but Raiza, it's a safety and it's COVID. Okay, forget about all of that. In an ideal world, your child should still be interacting, having social interaction. There are two ways in which I see this happening. A, you have your own mental health challenges whereby you have anxiety or fear, PTSD, and you are projecting that fear onto your child, or you are using that isolation as a tactic to control your child and make them more dependent on you. Those are the two ways in which I see isolation, or, oh no, don't do this, don't do that. I once had a client in their 20s, and they would say, yeah, I kind of have friends. I have friends at school, tertiary education, that kind of thing. But I don't really like trust them. I said, well, what's the obstacle there? They're like, well, you see, the thing is, I kind of grew up never really trusting people. And I said, why? Now, and they said, well, when I was little, my guardian sibling was killed by some friends. So what happened? The guardian did not grieve properly and ended up projecting for 20 years. 20 years. Friends will betray you. Friends should not be trusted. Friends should be this and that. So the child has to assimilate. The child has to go into school. They have to still make friends. They still have to spend time with people, but they never truly start to trust people because that message has been put in that head for 20 years. So for me, we have to try and undo that, right? So that in itself has if impacts as well. Ill treating another person in front of a child, for example, through domestic violence. Again, a lot of things are like, really, how? We cannot role model good emotional management, respect, discipline, love, compassion if we're beating on another parent in front of our child. That's just the end all be all. I can go on and on about domestic violence all I want, and I have had many discussions, but the reality is we cannot demonstrate appropriate adult relationship like behaviors while doing that to someone else. Emotional blackmail. Now, I really want to talk a little bit today, but I didn't have the time about narcissistic parental advice, abuse, but I'm going to insert a few of them here. So, emotional blackmail. Emotional blackmail is definitely something we don't talk enough about, but it is a form of manipulation. Here's an example. We would be much better off financially if we didn't have to take care of you. We would be much better off if we in a better place if we weren't spending so much money on you, whether it's your mental health, your PCOS, your skincare because of PCOS. I once had a client, uh, they were minor, only 14, and they said to me, well, I carry a lot of burden. I said, why? They're like, because, I feel bad. I was born with, or developed twisted intestines. The child had to get a surgery at 4. Were they in control? No. Did they ask for the surgery? No. Was it medically recommended? Yes. The parents decided to go through with it. Why does a 14-year-old either A, remember that, or B, see the importance of that? Because that parent has told that child sometime throughout their lifespan, we had to do XYZ to get you that surgery. And so now the child at 14 is carrying a burden that A, they shouldn't be carrying, and B, that they are a burden because they had to make their parents spend money. And there's no way a 14-year-old will remember a surgery from 10 years ago. So what happened? They were reminded in some form or fashion. And that in itself is intended to guilt the child. You will hear a lot, if you listen a lot to what are some of these examples, guilt and shame is constantly a topic through emotional abuse. Comparing your child to other children, what does that create? Disgust, contempt, and envy. I have adult clients who don't understand why they are so jealous of people. They're like, Raiza, I really do like myself, but I can't help but be jealous of other people. Why? You probably grew up with critical family or a family that was like, why you can't be like your cousin? Why you can't be like your neighbor? Why you can't be like your brother or your younger sister or whatever the case may be? You are constantly being compared. So what does that tell you? I am not enough. I am not enough. And if you constantly feel like you're not enough, you're going to feel that long term. So comparing your children, please, people, stop comparing your child to other people. Be content with what you got. You have a beautiful child, you have a healthy child. God bless. Go home. Right? Treating other children better than your own. Please raise your hand if you guys have seen this. Seen this. People, you'll be sitting there like, is this my mother? Is this my father? No way. No way. Can't believe it. And then you start to wonder, one or two things start. I try not to think in binary, but my mind tends to go there quite often. Either my mother has a switch that I need to find, or two, something's wrong with me. And it's usually the latter, because self-blaming comes naturally, right? So what is wrong with me but that my mother does not, or a father does not treat me that way? Because clearly the common denominator is my father, and he can switch, or my mother, but why is it that they treat me like that? Again, narcissism, parental abuse to some degree as well. Everything on the outside is beautiful and glossy. Inside, I'm stone cold. I don't care about you on the inside. You're just my trophy to demonstrate on the outside. Look how great my kid is. Look how great my kids' friends are. But once we get home, well, I don't need to put you up on the show, so I don't really need to pay much mind to you. In the case of narcissistic parental abuse, the child is usually very invisible at home. And it gets worse with gendering, whereby if you have a narcissistic father, the boy will have a very different experience from the girl. And if you have a narcissistic mother, the girl will have a very different experience from the boy. Right. How does this emotion, abuse and neglect impact the child in the moment? In the moment. We will get to long term eventually. Children learn that emotions and expressing emotions are not okay. They're not. Like I remembered, I told you about the example with if I keep telling someone that I have a pain and they don't listen to me, I stop asking. So you kind of stop embracing emotion. Shutting down becomes an adaptive behavior, even though it's a maladaptive behavior, but it becomes a norm, shutting down. And what I mean by shutting down is that emotionally you're just disconnecting or trying to disconnect from events that will cause emotion or experience, especially extreme emotion. Lashing out because I need to be heard and noticed. I do not believe that there are such things such as a bad child. I have had clients come to me and be like, my child is bad and he's disrespectful and he's rude. And I'm just like, I wonder where he learned that from. And of course I'm nice about it, I promise. But my initial thought, come on, we're not robots. We still have emotion. We still have a train of thought that's like, All right, let's start from here. No child is bad. Don't get me wrong. There are childhood disorders like ODD, which literally talks about opposition defiant disorder. Um, but that's just one of a handful of disorders that could quote unquote make your child bad, right? And even then, your child's not bad. It's something that needs to be treated and diagnosed and dealt with. Just like ADHD. You know how much people I am. So I could put my head on a block right now for every child that's getting licked. At least 1 in 5 of them children getting beat got ADHD. And I know I used to have a little hyperactivity as a child. Imagine this is Riza toned down. This is toned down Riza. Y'all don't want to see Riza when she was a teenager. My nickname was Flighty, right? So I used to get licks left, right, and center at Stella Maris. Big up Stella Maris, even though he used to give me licks. But the reality is, I had a little bit of hyperactivity. I also had dyslexia. I also had dyscalculia. That's what I always tell people. If I can be a psychologist, I could do it too, right? So the reality is, there are a lot of things that can make children lash out, and a lot of it is, please help me. I don't know how to say this. Why? Because we have not talked about emotions. We have not talked about how to express things. So the only way I know is by kicking and screaming, because what we've noticed, especially in Guyana, is that kicking and screaming gets mommy running with the belt, gets mommy coming in the room, gets daddy coming over, gets daddy, especially if the parents are separated. Come collect your son, come collect your child. They get not terrible, I enable. Well, daddy comes in. But when John and Jake are doing well in school, you just get a little, at best little clap, then you go along your way. A little clack and you go along your way. Nobody's like paying attention. I have so many clients who said to me, I know I was smart and I did well in school, but because I was smart, um, my parents never really checked my homework. They never really checked in on me. And I thought that was kind of sad, because at minimum in Guyana, the one thing your parents will ask about is school. So if your parents think that you're good in school, that means they ain't asking you nothing. They ain't asking you about nothing, because if they're not even asking you about school, the bare minimum most guys, how was school? You have homework? You did it? Right? Think about it. And if your parents think you're smart and you're not needed that support, then they ain't asking you nothing, which is sad. Difficulty connected with peers, like we talked about, because reality is you have not learned how those social cues work, because maybe you're isolated. You have not learned how to engage in any kind of emotional discussions because it was not role modeled, it was not discussed. Emotional distress can create somatic complaints. 95% of the time, actually no, 99% of the time when I do a client assessment, I'm looking for somatic complaints. Why? Because I do have clients who come in with IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, and most of that is related to anxiety. We have clients who always talk about headache and backache and those kind of things. So even as psychologists, we're not medical practitioners, but we do, at least I know I do, and I'm sure you guys do as well. We talk about periods, we talk about all that stuff. Poor Will is like, yes, I talk about periods, right? But we do. From the time a client stepped in, we've been taught that from the time a client stepped in, we're already assessing. We're looking at hair, we're looking at skin, we're looking at what they're wearing. Because we work with a lot of women, I'm constantly looking at their skin. How is there something? Is there cystic breakouts? All those things, because we want to see if there's a biochemical, hormonal something happening, right? So we are looking for psychosomatic. Low self-esteem, we can imagine after hearing all of this, low self-esteem can happen. Difficulty regulating emotion, we were not shown it. 90, okay, here we go back to statistics. 95% of the time when clients sit in my office, one of the earlier things that we'll do is look at an emotional wheel. Let's get you just awareness. Do you even know? Because people will come and say, right, I'm an angry person. I'm angry. And I'm like, I'm sure I bet you're not angry. You're hurt. You're hurt. And when we sit down and we talk about the scenarios on the emotional wheel, they're falling into the section with sadness and fear. They will fall into the angry section. They'll be frustrated, annoyed, but they're not rageful, right? But they're angry. Why? Because anger in Guyana has been normalized. That is a normal response to stress. That is a normal response to death. That is a normal response to heartbreak. And it's not everything, as Will is saying, everything. Mental health. And that's the other thing too. It's so strange. I always say Guyana is like a dichotomy, like very black and white. It's either we like to work a lot or we're lazy as hell, right? And then we're really, really expressive, and then we don't say anything. Like, think of when you watch a news and someone dies or there's an accident. Oh God! People that bawling down, wailing down, and then you see the other side of people are just like catatonic, like they have no response, and that's there's no in between. If we cannot show our children an in between space, we're gonna set them up to have issues with like what we're discussing today, right? Inability to ask for help or support when it is offered. Why? Because, like I said, if you keep telling them something hurts and they're not responding, they're just going to stop asking for it. They're going to stop asking for it. And also, the key thing with asking for help and collecting support is vulnerability. Guyanese do not like to be vulnerable. Absolutely not. We do not like to be vulnerable. Why? Because as children, we were vulnerable. We don't want to go there back as teenagers or adults. Don't put me back into a place where I don't have control, where I feel helpless, where I feel powerless. So
Yeah.
I'm not gonna I'm not gonna ask for any help. Heightened sensitivity to rejection. What do you? Well, like I said, you don't want to feel that way. So I'm uncomfortable with rejection, and I will definitely say. And actually, I found out recently that persons with ADHD suffer with this new dysphoria. I don't know if you've seen it recently. It's called rejection hypersensitivity dysphoria. Didn't think there was a dysphoria for it, but it makes a lot of sense. Because think about it. We don't like to be vulnerable. We don't like to feel rejected. So we're going to avoid things and we're going to be very sensitive to those things. And I could definitely say that more than likely 50% of a lot of the domestic violence in Guyana and all these kinds of things and murder suicides are related to rejection. People, everybody just wants to hurt people and die. Oh my God, you hurt me, you rejected me, how dare you? My sister called it mineism. You're mine. And if you leave me, I feel rejected and I am going to make you hurt for that. Withdrawing from friends and activities, always watch your children, people. If your child who's bubbly and happy-go-lucky and flighty, like me, my mother always knew when something was wrong. She always knew. Always knew. She'd be like, you ain't supposed to be this quiet. You are never this quiet. What has happened? So watch your children. You know your children, right? If you spend enough time or you get to know them, you spend that time to get to know them, you'll know that something's wrong with your child. But as soon as you see children pulling away, ask a question. What's happening? Are you okay? You didn't see John or Jack in a while. That's not you. You want to talk about something. But again, you have to create the environment for that. And if your child hasn't trusted you from the time they were 4 years old, you can't come at 14 and now try and have that relationship. You can try, but you'll meet with resistance because they've already established for 10 years, you're not to be trusted. Lack of language, like we described before, disassociative tendencies. People wonder, like, what do you mean by disassociative tendencies? Okay, so disassociation has depersonalization, derealization. You essentially, when we see it in children like this reality sucks. So I need a new reality. I need a reality where I am safe, free to be myself, loved. I had a client who had a VR, you know, those things you put on your head, the VR, virtual reality. They lived in the VR half of their day. Why? Because their reality was not fun. So they lived in the reality. You know, in the reality, they had a mother, a father, a brother, a big brother, a little sister. They had a family. Even though in reality, they did have a family, but it wasn't the family that, sir? Oh, yeah, it wasn't the family that was healthy for them, good for them. And so why? I'm going to create a whole different reality elsewhere. Same thing with disassociation. There's something called maladaptive daydreaming, and I'm seeing a lot of clients coming out with it recently where they're just daydreaming to cope. And actually, that's like a new way of coping now, where you're just escape. Yes, escapism. Oh, don't worry. Always, disassociation is usually, whether it's intentional or not, most of the time it's not. That's why it's called disassociation. But maladaptive daydreaming, yeah, I guess can be intentional. But it is escapism. Same thing like substance abuse. Shame and guilt, all around emotions. We already discussed that. It's a tactic. How does it, continue. Depression, hyperactivity, aggression, like we talked about, that lashing out can be conveyed as hyperactivity. inability to handle emotions, like we said already. You can't regulate your emotions, so you will potentially suffer with depression or aggression, fail to thrive. Because you've got all of this going on in your head, even if you're like a smart kid, it's going to be hard for you to focus on stuff because you've got all of this going on in your head, right? So that ability to thrive is going to be, you can, but it'll be a challenge. Appearing uncaring or indifferent to others, but at the same time being compassionate to others. Major issue in Guyana. Guyanese also do not know self compassion. Why? You were not prioritized as a child. Your emotions were not prioritized as a child. Your existence was not really prioritized as a child. So, what do you then realize? I'm not a priority. So, I need to put all of this loving energy I have. I want to love people. I want to express things. I've got all these feelings. Hey, you need help? I'm going to talk to you. I don't know how to describe my problem, so I'm going to sit here and listen. And then 10, 15 years goes by. Who am I? I am now the strong friend. Yeah, enter the strong friend. The strong friend has problems too. Okay? So the strong friend, always check in with your strong friends. Why? Because your strong friend has realized, I don't want to talk about me. I don't want to because I don't either know how to, or it's too much opening them can of worms, and we don't want to open them can of worms. So it's easier for me to sit here and listen to your problems. You come offload on me, and I'll just keep forgetting that I have my own issues. So self-compassion is a work for Guyanese overall. Prioritizing yourself, boundaries, establishing your wants, your needs, your values, knowing what's important. Higher risk of anxiety, developmental delays, like we said. Even if you're like smart, textbook smart, you still may experience a lot of distress and behavioral problems because you're not able to express what you're feeling. Long term, these are essentially just emphasized and the long term version of some of the things that happen in childhood, right? So, difficulty maintaining relationships. You can't maintain relationships if you can't talk about your emotions. You can't talk about your past. If you live in denial, you're not going to talk about the emotional abuse you experienced as a child. So, what do you talk about? You just sit there and say nothing. It's not very healthy. Your relationships, when you do have them, are distant, disconnected. Like that client I talked about earlier, whereby they're like, yeah, I have friends, but I don't trust them 100%. They might kill me in my sleep, right? You always have that train of thought. Distrust in others, like I said, you've learned that trusting and hoping that the people who love you will respond a certain way and they don't, so you just start not trusting people in general. And I have had clients say this to me a lot, and I'm sure you guys have heard this. If my own mother or my own father couldn't do X, then why would anybody else? Why would my girlfriend? Why would my boyfriend? What's so special about me? My mother didn't like me since I little, and I know that. I know that for a fact. People always fact checking us. Inability to ask for help, and this becomes problematic as well, because I mean, you're sitting there silently suffering because you've learned that no one cares enough to listen to me. Why would I ask for help? Persistent feelings of loneliness, emptiness, guilt, and shame. Like I said, guilt and shame will go through that lifespan. Through that lifespan. Loneliness because you want to connect with people, but you don't know how to. And you've tried and you failed, and you've tried and you've been hurt. And emptiness, why? I always talk about emptiness because if we don't give our children an opportunity to experience things, if we have those parents who are scared, or we have those parents who don't let our children out, don't let them build autonomy, you don't really build a sense of identity. And I find like when my clients say, Rise, I'm just so empty. I don't know how to explain it. And I'm like, okay, could it be that it's something related to like you don't know who you are, your identity, what you like? They're like, yeah, like I just sit and I just exist. I don't know. Like if you were to ask me right now what I like, I'd be like, I don't know. Because you haven't tried. You weren't allowed to have hobbies. You weren't allowed to interact. You weren't allowed to go out. You weren't allowed to have difficult conversations. School and home and come back. Lessons and come back. That's it. Inability to deal with emotions of others and yourself. Like I said, can't maintain relationships if you don't know how to deal with other people's emotions and your own. Disassociative shutting down, this still happens into your 20s and 30s. I still have clients who do that. Sabotaging relationships and opportunities in order to avoid rejection. We already talked about that sensitivity to rejection. What do I mean by sabotaging? For example, with a relationship, maybe you have a relationship and you're supposed to go out on a date. You ultimately believe that you are not worthy of this relationship. So what happens? Your phone dies and you don't plug it in. And then when the partner or whatever friend is waiting for you and they come back the next day, hey, what happened last night? You're supposed to meet us. Oh, my phone died and I forgot. You're sabotaging. You don't want to spend time with those people. You don't think you're worthy of that relationship. You don't think you're worthy of that date. So you sabotage yourself by doing silly things, and it's become so obvious. If you spend time with people who sabotage a lot, it's very like stop, just stop. We know what you're doing, just stop. Right? Even interviews, things like opportunities. You don't think you might even develop imposter syndrome at your own job. I am not worthy of this interview. Why did they even take this interview? You know what? I'm just gonna you don't say I'm gonna sleep in, but you start to sleep in and you just don't wake up. Because at the end of the day, you say to yourself, I'm gonna fail at this job anyway. Just go back to sleep and miss the opportunity. So you are afraid of being rejected. So you run from opportunity, even though it's so weird. You run towards it and then you run away. Is that like avoidance, anxious attachment kind of style? You run towards and then you run away. Because internally, we always want, humans want. They want social interaction, they want connection, they want something, access, advancement, whatever, forward mobility. But then there's always that fear in the back of your head. I'm not worthy. I'm not this. I can't do this. Why do I think I could do this? And then we run away. We avoid. Heightened risk of anxiety, depression, PTSD, eating disorders. People are like, why eating disorders? I think one of the things we need to look at, we don't see a lot of eating disorders in Guyana. I don't know if the other psychologists would say nay or yay. Usually when I ask about eating or appetite issues, they're like, no. Most guys say no. But I do learn a lot from that when I do ask the question. I almost took it out of my assessment and I was like, you know what? No. But the reality is eating disorders don't have much to do with food per se. It's about control. Same thing like cutting. It's all about control. If I can't go with my friends and I can't see people and I don't have hobbies and I go to school and I come home and I just go to lessons and I have nothing else going on for me in life, the one thing I can control is what I put in my mouth, whether it stays there, how much, and when. Same thing for cutting. And I would definitely say if you guys have kids and you've listened to any of this and you're like, oh my God, I've done some of these things, what do I do? Please check in with your children, because a lot of children, we're seeing a lot more cutting. At least I'm seeing a lot more cutting. And what we call by cutting, we mean non-suicidal self-harm, self-injury. So this is not just cutting, but burning as well. So I would definitely say to check your children for that, and have a discussion with them. Don't berate them, don't criticize them, try to understand what's happening. Because when children are cutting, what they're doing is replacing a physical pain because they don't know how to cope with the emotional pain. It's easier to deal with the physical pain and like zone in on that than be all over the place emotionally. All over the place emotionally. So please check in with your children. Where am I? Emotional hyperactivity or reactivity definitely happens because you're scared of the rejection. You're trying to proceed, but then you're angry. You're angry at your parents. You're angry at yourself. You're angry at your partner. So aggression, anger, definitely common. Substance misuse. We talked about escapism earlier. Definitely substance misuse. Just another form of. This is like adult disassociation. This is the advanced version of disassociation where. Yes. Yes, alcohol and other drugs, as I would say. Alcohol and other drugs, because yes, alcohol does fall under drugs. So we say alcohol and other drugs. Um, Deeply feeling flawed. My goodness. If you don't think that everything that we just talked about, if you think you're coming out unscathed, no. You feel deeply flawed. I have so many clients who are just like, I just so much self-loathing, so much self-loathing. What do you do with that? And this is why. And then we're surprised. We're surprised that our suicide rate is high. When you experience all of this stuff that we just spent the last like 45 minutes talking about, of course, people feel horrible inside. And of course, they want to get away from it and end it and stop those feelings of being flawed and imperfect and just existing. If you just imagine living your life and just feeling like you exist, that's it. You have nothing to say that was great. And of course, you filtered everything. You filtered all the good experiences. You don't remember that. I remember when I was in like second form, somebody said, one of the teachers, do 100 things good and do one thing wrong. Everybody can remember that one thing. And that's why a lot of parents is be like, don't embarrass me. Don't go out there and embarrass me. Because your child can be perfect at home. But God forbid they go out there and do something to embarrass you. In those instances, it's not that tells me if I heard a client say that, whether it's a client or the parent, I'd be like, it's not about you. Your child is here. When you're talking about don't embarrass me, oh, we're living in daddy's world or mommy's world, right? That's like always listen for language, people. Always listen for language. And then last but not least, continuing the pattern. If you do not get intervention, people, I'm not saying that you can't change. It will be a hard road and by yourself. But the reality is, but the reality is that without intervention, you will just do what your parents did because that's just natural. You might even do worse because now you are at a difficult place where you actually don't have any knowledge of emotional awareness whatsoever, right? I want to talk about wait, where is that coming from? Right. This is like one of the last parts, I promise. Why do caregivers neglect? I think that this is an important thing. I always want people, I am not kind of here trying to beat up on parents, even though I know that my lives tend to seem that way. But I want to go through why. Like I said in the last slide, which connects to this slide, which is your parents' own previous experience with emotional abuse just continues the cycle. And then we have anger, resentment towards a child. People are like, why would someone be angry at their child? Let's see. Unplanned pregnancy, no support system, bad relationship with the child's other parent, lost opportunities, whether financially or you want to go after your master's or wanted to move. We see this a lot in cases. I think there was a great document called The Chronicles of like the Barrel Children, which is children left back here where their parents go off to like the States and stuff like that because they get like the green card and they have to go. And then the children end up staying here. So that's also a thing too. People be like, nah, 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 you only put in for you. You don't put in for you and you 10-year-old child. So either you don't come or the child got stay, that kind of thing. So that kind of breeds resentment as well. We do see work, military work, incarceration. Think about it this way. If you're incarcerated, who's gonna watch your child? The same grandparent, more than likely, who treated you the same way, right? So all you're doing is no. Well, right. We are seeing some. I did see heard hear about that the other day. I actually listened to that this morning. Yes, they resort back. Yeah, they revert back to the same behavior. Thank you, Will. Thank you, sir. No, but I have been seeing. I actually watched a educational video this morning on um how grandparents are different with their grandchildren. And again, the parent now, the adult child is sitting there again. Remember we said, is this my mother? Is this my father? No way, right? So we do see that happening with grandparents, but Will is correct. When they then become the primary caregiver, we definitely see them reverting back to those old tactics because again, that's all they know. That's all they know, right? So we see the same kind of thing happening. Addiction and mental health. You cannot be present with your child if you yourself are battling depression. And it's not necessarily like your fault. So don't feel any way, but just know. And I've tried to actually do a lot of like, I guess like acceptance therapy, whereby I get clients to understand that if your primary caregiver had depression themselves, can you now that you have depression, can you now understand what your mother or father went through? And can we release some of that hurt? Can we release some of that burden? because now you know what it's like to be a mother or father with a mental health disorder as well. So it definitely impedes the client's ability, the parent's ability to be present and to be engaged. And we're talking about emotional needs here. If you can't take care of your own emotional needs, how are you going to take care of a child's own? And actually, that's a discussion I have with some of my clients who are like engaged or married or thinking about children. I'm like, you have to consider how much energy do you have to expel on yourself and how much will you have to expel on a child. And that's a discussion for you and your partner in terms when you look at planning children. Okay. Addiction, like we said, escapism. If you're just not there, you're just not there. Also, financially, how can you financially be present with your child and support them and stuff if you wait like burning out an entire paycheck on the rum shop? I always say that. I never understand how in Guyana people just go lash down the whole pay on a rum shop and then somehow how are they still eating? How are the children at home still eating? I never understand how people with deep rooted alcoholism specifically uh, addiction can still maintain life. um, Extreme stress and violence, like we said before, how can we model that behavior if we're not if we're not being kind and compassionate to our own partners? And then death or traumatic event. Now, grief, like many things, can be role modeled. If we don't know how to grieve ourselves, we don't know how to role model it. If our way of grieving is just shoving it under the rug, then our children will just shove it under the rug, and then those things continue to accumulate. Now, when the family system is having a hard time of accepting that grief and whether that will then prolong into depression, you're not going to be able to be present in your child's family or life, your child's life. So definitely a traumatic death. And like we gave the example already with the 20-year-old projection of that grief, that's unresolved grief. Someone who's still nagging at their child 20 years later that your friend's gonna kill ya, that's unresolved grief. That's just the end all be all. It's probably trauma as well, but it's definitely unresolved grief. All right, so coming down to the end here, I promise. Oh, I'm doing good on time, actually. Oh, I should be very proud of myself. Right, so these are some of the books. Michelle Amsterdam, who's my colleague here, would recognize one or two of them. So let's start with, these are some books that I've pulled for people. You can obviously take a screenshot or screen grab for people on Zoom. These are books that I recommend when looking at child abuse, CEN, and so on. So this Jonas Webb, Dr. Webb actually is where I get a lot of, she actually even does training of therapists in childhood emotional neglect therapy. So running on Empty No More deals with that CEN that occurs and then how to manage it, obviously, as adults. Narcissistic parent, father. This Carolyn Foster, yeah, Carolyn Foster actually has a few. And this was recommended to me actually by a client. They were reading The Narcissistic Mother and they said it was really, really helpful. So I did some more research. And so Narcissistic Father, this is a good one. Dealing with emotional abuse, abusive father, and a complex PTSD. People are like, complex PTSD. The reality is PTSD for some is major events that may happen one off here, one off here, whatever. Complex PTSD is what I think Guyanese actually is a sequence of things. Guyanese, don't get me wrong, Guyanese suffer with a lot of PTSD. There are a lot of people walking around in Guyana because I can tell you right now, a percentage of the private practicing psychologists are in this room right now. So we possibly cannot have enough people to go around to deal with all of the robberies, assaults, physical assaults, sexual assaults, traumatic events, accidents. Complex PTSD is what we all just went through. It's consistent events happening over time. And it's actually different to treat because the biological makeup of someone who experiences complex PTSD differs from that of someone with PTSD because There is ongoing biological stuff happening in the body. You're constantly being triggered, you're constantly having a release of cortisol, you're constantly stressed, and so on. So complex PTSD is actually slightly different. Complex PTSD here, Surviving the Thriving. That's actually a good book. It's been sitting in my wish list for like a year and a half. Will ever be good enough? Healing the daughters of narcissistic mothers. Emotionally absent mothers. That's actually one of my favorite books. It actually talks about healing and recognizing the from CEN, the invisible effects of CEN, childhood emotional neglect. That's a very good book. That's the one that's in the office. And then It Didn't Start With You. It Didn't Start With You is a great book because it talks about intergenerational trauma, which is also another issue we have in Guyana. Our issues are intergenerational. I had somebody said to me the other day, I wish I could go back to my grandparents and ask them, what the hell, what are you doing? The reality is that's how far we have to go. That's how far we have to go. We have to go back to our grandparents and further and further. And this is how, even when we look at mental health in Ghana, we also have to look at culture and history because culture and history play a lot into our mental health. So we do have, that's a very good book. I have that one. Uh, I'll say this with a premise. The first chapter, the introduction is kind of wonky. Get past it, and there's a good book after that. But the first chapter or so is kind of wonky. And then, of course, I am very pro workbook. Michelle Amsterdam here, my colleague, knows in the office we have a few workbooks. And so I am all for workbooks in general. So this is the, oh, we can't see this blocking there. The I think it's the adverse childhood experience, the ACE, which is a score that we use when looking at trauma in children. And so it's a workbook looking at how to recover essentially from emotional abuse. And I always tell people workbooks are great because your therapist is not always with you 24/7. And as therapists, at least I know, and I know some of my other colleagues, we give a lot of homework. Yeah. I always tell people I give homework, I don't mark homework. I'm not a teacher, I'm a therapist. I should get that printed on my like on a book or something. Because the reality is you need homework because your therapist is not always gonna be there and you have to practice. Persons who are CBT practitioners to some degree, yeah, we're coming, don't worry. CBT, we believe in the concept that practice is what will create change, and it's actually you practice more between sessions rather than in session, and so that's why we encourage workbooks. And what's happening? Is that it? No, I have thank you and questions, so we can go to questions. Thank you, questions. All right, there we go. Questions, yes, ma'am. Mhm. Triggers, right? Good. Sure. Sure. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Book smart. Right. Uh-huh. Motivation. Oh, sorry, sorry.
So I was wondering that we share a lot. Like from growing up, I always do stuff with him. We do our sporting events together. I accompany him. We have a really good relationship. We're closely bonded. Now I can recall for this year, I don't know, well, he was home online schooling for this year. um from the time he comes home, okay baby, how was school? School was okay. How was friends? Or how, or better, I may probably ask the question, how is like things other than school, his interactions, and so just to know what's going on. So we have a really good relationship. He would normally say anything to me, whether his about his developmental growth and so on. But about four times for this year, which is new, that he's saying, "Oh well, stuff happens." So like what? Oh, mom, you wouldn't understand. And despite I would try to get him to speak, he wouldn't, and I would try several times. and he wouldn't. So I was wondering if actually I brainstormed this myself and I came up, is it a want of attention? Is it a problem of a generation gap? Is it something that I did, or is it because of my gender? I still do not know the answer for that. So
Well, we also have Michelle here, who's child and adolescence. But I think at least we try not to answer questions like that in therapy per se because we don't have the whole picture. But just as someone who spends enough time with teenagers, we kind of know that they get a little secretive around certain ages because it might have to do with like puberty or like bodily changes, or it might be like there's a person they're interested in. So it could be a few things. And I feel like if it doesn't disrupt your actual relationship, um, and it doesn't cause like a break in the bond, I think you can, let it slide for a little bit. I definitely want to hear from input from my other psychologists. But the reality is, I think I would definitely ask myself, is it that because you're used to sharing everything, that now that he's withholding some stuff, you feel like, did I do something, da 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 da, So I feel like for me, I would say, have a discussion if you want with him. Say, like, I'm just wondering if everything's okay, and is it just like you don't want to tell me? But again, it doesn't have to be immediate. You can like watch it over time. But I just think it's like a teenage. You said as a boy, right? Teenage boy, yeah, teenage boys. And the gentleman here can tell me, as teenage boys once themselves, will
Right. Uh, so let me say this first, and that is I thoroughly enjoyed your presentation, and I like the fact that you made it so relatable. Thank you so much. And this is a great question. And for some teenagers, that period is a period of storm and drang. Is a stressful period. But when there is a close relationship with a parent, it is not so stressful. Now, in your case, it could be, and like Raiza said, we try not to diagnose by proxy, but it could be the age gap, it could be the gender gap, but it could also be that your son is experiencing typical teenage developmental milestone, which is individuation, which he's now becoming his own person. And so he feels that he needs to solve some of his issues himself and not run to mommy with it. And so he's becoming an adult, and that individuation, that separation from you, which could be frightening for parents. And I'm a parent of, well, one teenager now. And it is frightening to see a child grow up and not need you, not want you anymore. But it is a normal, healthy part of the growth process. So your son is very likely, once he's still well adjusted, once he's still, not getting into problems and so on, he's doing well. He just doesn't, he just wants to deal with some things on his own now because he is growing to be one, a man, and two, an adult.
I definitely. Michelle, any commentary from you? Yeah, sure. Any commentary from Michelle Amsterdam?
I will say that I definitely agree with Will. I think what's important is to keep the line of communication open. And as Riza was saying, when children are at that stage, sometimes it's weird to talk to your parents about certain things, right? So I think it's important for you to just keep that communication open. So when he's comfortable, he can come and talk to you. So that would be my input.
I think it's also just as a parent, just because you've had this bond, right? Because you mentioned, you kind of talked about how the bond has been and stuff. I think it's just that it don't think it's slipping away. Is he leaving me? Is he becoming independent? It's scary. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Mhm. Mhm. Oh. Well, there's a lot of Google nowadays, so that might be the one wise friend people have. But I do hear that there is a fear. What I'm hearing is that there's a fear to let that little slip through the hands, and it's just a matter of Have you done your best? Have you given him values? Have you shared with him skills? Have you left the door open? Then you can rest assured, keep those affirmations with you and keep whenever that anxiety comes up, be like, I've made a good child. If there's a problem, he will come back to me. I will be here. Right there, and Will is saying, yes, he will come back. Yes, sir.
So it's more like a comment, but not in relation to that. It was great presentation. I love the structure. Um, when we talk about child abuse, and I see the long term, what happens is the destruction of emotional abuse in children takes place between birth and by year eight, 9. So by then the destruction has already been embedded. So now they're going through adolescence and there's their own identity crisis coupled with the abuse. So it becomes harder. And what you can probably forecast is that it will continue to get worse because you have children making children and adults who have been abused themselves. And I'm wondering, what, in taking into consideration the Caribbean coming from a post colonialism, which we are still trying to deal with as a region, children are in real bad shape, and because of our parents being traditional, think that the big stick method would have been the best way going forward. It's now important that children as early as 19, 20 realize that they were abused, make it their responsibility to be corrected. um, I don't know what we can do with parents. They are already old and gone, but we have to instill in young adults that they have to take the responsibility.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Sir, I didn't get your name, sir. Telford Lane. Hello. Very nice to meet you, Telford. Right. So, quite accurate. And actually, in one of my bios that people ask for bios, one of the last lines I always use is my hope for when I am practicing is not, I'm not dealing with individuals for now. I'm dealing with future families because the reality is what you're saying, okay, what is the parents who are now grandparents or whatever case, like, can we really help? We can try our best. Doesn't always happen. It doesn't always work out. We do see, I don't know. I do therapy with some people in the 50s and 60s and stuff. It's a little bit harder. But yes, you're right. When I am talking with my 19-year-old, 25-year-old, 35-year-old, 40-year-old, I'm speaking to them as not only trying to resolve their stuff, but I'm already envisioning what is this person going to be like as a parent? What is this person going to be like as a partner? What is this person going to be like as an accountant, a lawyer, a doctor? Right? So when we do mental health, at least I do mental health, I'm looking at not just the individual, but the different versions of them the parent, them the co-worker, them the whatever. We have questions? Thank you.
So the question is, how would you describe a healthy parent and child emotional relationship? And in terms of discipline, how do you know when you are crossing the line to abuse?
That line is very fine. That's why we try not to cross it, or we try not to get there. My theory, okay, people guys need to be like, okay, right, so this is unrealistic. You must licks must come. Um, when I think, how do you know when you've crossed the line? I don't know if you've ever, anybody here who ever either received licks or gave licks to a child. There is a feeling. There is a feeling that you know right as you're about to hit that butt or whatever. There is a feeling. That is the feeling when you know you've gone too far. When you feel rageful or angry like that, never give licks while angry. Don't give licks while angry. You cannot control your hand. You cannot control your movement. Like, what? You cannot, do not give licks. Step away from the situation. Step back. Go take a breather. Go outside. Do some deep breaths. Calm yourself. Pray. Whatever you need to do. Go back inside. And you can either, some people choose to still give out, okay, I'm going to give you this ruler, 3 lashes in your hand, whatever. I am not like that. I'm going to go back inside and have a conversation with that child. Right? Because the reality is, you licks, give licks, give licks. You never teach a child anything, though. Like, and I always make this example. You give a child licks for teething, right? They teeth or they pick up something on the road, whatever. You give them licks. That child, as they get older, they only know I should be scared of teething because my mother But when they get older and they're a grown man and they go and rob a bank, they ain't thinking about their mother because they did not learn that it was morally wrong, societal wrong, whatever wrong, inappropriate, right? So what we need to teach is children values on addressing why the things are wrong. You want to address that question too? Okay, sure. Hello. Please state your name as well. We're learning people's names today.
Good afternoon, Dr. Ellen G. Denton, licensed psychologist. I have to piggyback off of such a wonderful response to that. And I will just have to say, as a true Jamaican, straight from y'all, right? I have to say that it's a part of our post-colonial culture, unfortunately, to hit as discipline. And it's hard to correct it and undo it. But as she's just very, very practically explained, that it does not teach the pro-social behavior. So might want to correct the behavior of stealing or whatever it is, and we assume that the licks, which is very basic cognitive field, is very basic. But our kids are brighter than that now, and we can have mature discussions and engage them cognitively. And then after we do that, we can teach them the pro-social behavior. So instead of stealing, what do? You gain responsibility, you earn whatever you want, and you can do it a little at a time. I can reinforce it and praise you when you've done it or give you the incentive after you've done it. And then they will contribute to society. So we have to teach that. It's far more lengthier, it's far more patient than giving licks, and giving licks out of anger, even worse, right? But because what you're doing at that time is teaching them, you're conditioning and pairing that behavior with your anger. And that's, we all, I'm assuming everyone has felt something in their development in this room. So we all know what that feels like, but that still does not teach the pro-social behavior, the behavior we want. So investing in teaching them the behavior and conditioning them for that, the operant conditioning, by incentivizing or praising, and them learning the responsibility, is how we create contributors to our society. Thank you.
Will, you were locking eyes. Do you have a question or comment? Oh, no? Licks, yeah, so we continue. This is what this well, there was another question about what is an appropriate bond, but I just want to say this one thing about, because again, this is mental health, but as psychologists we deal a lot with social issues, because the reality is most people come to therapy a lot for social issues. Please me again, name again. Dr. Denton, right. So Dr. Denton was saying, she spoke quickly, just zoop, about associations. And I said this at the EU on the International Day of Elimination Against Women. We have a domestic violence rate in Guyana, even though we are considered one of the more progressive countries. We have the most females in parliament. We have a lot of female heads, da, 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 da. Why is it that our domestic violence is so high? Because unfortunately, we have taught children, and boy children specifically, you embarrass me, you must be punished physically. You upset me, you must be punished physically. You go out there and thief or do that or cheat or whatever, you must be punished physically. So then let's say, for example, boy child, I don't want to gender anybody because women do give licks, don't worry with that. They got some women who's beat man in here. And so that person grows up and you cheat on me, you disrespect me, you embarrass me, you make me look bad, whatever the case may be. The only way I know for you to be punished is by physical punishment. And so then we create that physical punishment as a response to that triggering feeling. Does that make sense? Do we agree on that? I think it's really important for us to get that, because when I said that, there were some youth organizations there looking like, and I'm like, what? That's the reality. You guys pro corporal punishment, you can keep getting domestic violence because the two are interlinked. I think we've established today that a lot of stuff happens in a lifespan before we get to where we are in our 20s and 30s. The question pertaining to what do we deem a healthy relationship between I think first of all, don't do anything you saw on the screen today. But I think one of the things, it needs to be balanced. It needs to be appropriate. Like I mentioned earlier with the oversharing, is what am I going to say? Is it helpful? Is it hurtful? Does my child know what to do with that information? If I don't know what to do with that information, my child probably doesn't understand that information. And so I feel like it needs to be appropriate and it needs to be loving, but not possessive. It needs to, and that's why I said it can't be black or white. It has to be a middle ground. It can't be like one or the other. It can't be, oh, if I don't get you at all, then you don't get to do this. And it can't be conditional either. And I think that's another thing in Guyana. A lot of things, well, you could go out if you do X, Y, Z. Now, don't get me wrong. Children do need structure. They do like structure, actually. And structure, not always like, but we have, that's a whole other discussion. I have a comment here.
So to help with that question, I think, how do you categorize a healthy emotional relationship? It starts with the parent being emotionally healthy. Like that's where it is. And if you as a parent you're not emotionally healthy, you can never have a healthy relationship with your child. So you have to correct you before you decide to deal with your kids.
Thank you, bravo, sir. Yes, very good. Yeah, exactly. You like I always tell my clients. My clients do this thing where they start feeling good, they start feeling nice. They're like, well, someone messaging me, and this person likes me, and they're like, should I get in a relationship? And I'm like, do you have energy for that? Not that it's just, I'm not saying, I don't say it like that. I promise. I promise I'm not. I'm very professional. I said, okay, well, that's nice. I mean, it's nice to be, how do you feel about that? How do you feel about that attention? Da, da, da. And then I'll say, do you think, I said, I'm going to put it over to you because as therapists, we don't give advice, we give guidance. I said, how much energy do you think you have to give to a relationship to make it the best thing or the most healthy thing? Out of 10. Oh, well, I need to expel X amount of out of 10. How much do you have right now? Right? And how much can you truly? Right? So I always tell them that. I don't be like, no, don't date that with nobody. It's not healthy for you now. Next question.
Expand on punishment and discipline of adolescents for us. Expand on punishment and discipline on adolescents for us.
Expand on discipline and punishment for adolescents. It's a fine line. It's a fine line because the reality is, will you have a comment on this? Because the reality is, because adolescents, their phone is everything, right? People just be like, take away the phone, take away the phone. I'm not always for like just taking away the phone and stuff like that, because the reality is, your child, if they feel, remember we talked about that reality being like, current reality being unhealthy. If your child feels that their current environment is unhealthy, they're going to escape into their phone. And you take away their phone, then they have nobody. And that existence is really terrifying. So even that, anybody else have opinions on this, other psychologists? Because because we don't know the case, we can't really just say what it is.
I thought that it might be helpful to share that punishment is not necessarily discipline. That discipline really is teaching your child how to be, how to behave, how to conduct him or herself. What we do when we punish is we try to control the child rather than teach the child how to self-control. And so that is where the challenge is a lot, and that is why we often, for example, if you have a strong-willed child and the punishment is not working, you want to escalate it, and that is why we so often cross into abuse. I think it might be more helpful if we look at consequences rather than punishment. And like Dr. Denton said, we need to find opportunities to catch our children being good. Because very often we only notice them, and you said this very clearly in your presentation, often we only notice them when they misbehave. And so in order to get the attention that they need, they misbehave. And it's not a conscious choice. I'm going to misbehave to get mom's attention, but I need attention. So there is there is nothing else I can do. It's only one way I've learned how to get it. So catch your child being good. Focus on natural consequences of behavior and understand that discipline is teaching a child how to control him or herself rather than trying to control the child.
Yeah, and I think also we often think of like basic psychology 101 would suggest that there's negative and positive reinforcement, negative and positive punishment. And we also have to, and if you don't know what that means, just Google it. What are some examples of negative and positive reinforcement and negative and positive punishment? Because it could be the change in the discipline action that you need. If something's not working, that's the thing. Will's correct. People will tend to just keep escalating. The licks will get worse and worse and worse. And I think the question was like, how do you know when it's gone too much? Other than I talked about that emotion, that feeling of when you're angry and like not giving licks during that period, but when it stops being also about like, yeah, about the child, when it stops being about either correcting or helping a situation. And I think I've had some terrible cases where people remember, and this is what I mean by physical can stick with you even as much as emotional and vice versa. I have clients who remember licks from when they were 4 and 7 and running down the road trying to run from an adult. You know, as a 7-year-old in just like the little outfit running down the road, fleeing from a parent. Like, and this case too, again, social issues, not just domestic violence. The case with the young lady from Saints. We cannot create families that children would rather die than go home to their parents because they are that scared of their parents. People, we also are concerned about a suicide rate. The reality is your children are scared of going home. If we look at most of these adolescent cases, either as some form of rejection and of course this is not limited, but we do have persons who are scared to go home with a bad grade. How could your child think? People, take a step back, please, for the love of God. Take a step back and say, have I done my duty as a parent, or have I been a good enough parent or healthy enough parent that my child would rather die, kill themselves, and come home with a bad grade or pregnant or whatever? Like, what have we taught our children if that's what they fear? Any other questions there?
Hi, good afternoon.
Yes, we can hear you.
This was an amazing presentation. Thank you so much. It had me going a lot of ouch and eyes. One of the questions I have is something that I even do in present. I have teenagers, and sometimes my daughter would come talking to me, and I would be hearing but not paying attention. And the only time I'll get like she's really talking to me is when she said, "Should I use my invisibility to do good or evil?" And then I would stop what I'm doing. But the debate we would have often is I would tell her her timing is wrong. Am I right to say that, or I need to adjust myself to when she's available to talk?
Thanks, Joanne. Hi. Let me get this clear. She's coming to ask you about something. You guys have a kind of code word for like listen to me. I need you to listen to me, which is, should I put on my invisibility cloak for good or bad? And
Yeah.
then your response will either be yes or no. Or you could say, or like you said, your timing is wrong. I think that may have started off as like a joke, but now that we understand a little bit more that the word wrong should be kind of slowly shifted throughout the vocabulary, at least as a therapist, we don't ever say wrong, or we don't really say why, you know. So I would definitely say something along the lines of, this is not a good time, or can you come back? Always give your children a chance to come back. Say, mommy's busy right now, or mommy can speak to you in 10 minutes, or or you can get a little advance and say, I would love to give you all of my attention, and right now I'm not able to do that. Can you come back in 10 minutes, or can I come find you in 10 minutes? Right? or 15 minutes or whatever the case, or give them a specific time. Say, okay, I'd like to come and talk to you at 1 o'clock. Is that okay? I mean, it's very structured, but some people like that. Some children like that. Some people are like, all right, cool. I can
Okay.
depend on my mom at 1 o'clock. Cool. Right. And then you show up. You make sure you show up. If you tell your child 15 minutes or 1 o'clock, you better show up because they'll be waiting with bells on for you. Because if it's something important, because if your child comes and says that, more than likely it's something they definitely want to talk about. They're not just checking in to see what you're doing. Okay? Joanne, I hope that was helpful. It says Joanne is talking, but I can't hear her.
Yes, it was. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Joanne. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. How do you motivate a brilliant but lazy child? First of all, stop calling him lazy. I mean that with all respect, ma'am. Please stop calling your child lazy. I think what he might be is unmotivated and bored. He's not lazy. Maybe he's just so bright that he's like, I'm over this stuff. I'm over, like, he might be in second form and be like, I'm ready for sixth form. Let me go, you know? So I think it could be something like that. I would say put him into more activities, like by asking him. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right, right. All right, right. Yeah.
And that comes with exceptionality. He's brilliant and he's well gifted. I don't accept that as a parent.
Mhm.
You know, but
So you want him to be going, like going. Like, okay, hold on. Fifth form. Right. Mm-hmm.
It was kind of like the entire time. He was always brilliant. I was always there, supporting him and so on. Now I'm there supporting, like, oh mom, you're stressing over nothing. That is not it. When I don't see it on the report card, and how can I say that it is uh, you know, a brilliant child waiting to write CXC?
Well, the reality is, you have already labeled your child as a brilliant child. It could be a few things. Either he doesn't see himself as a brilliant child, he doesn't care that he's a brilliant child. And brilliance comes in different forms. There's actually a great thing. There's a great study. It's called the 8 intelligences. So you might be like, clearly, I have an emotional intelligence. Will Campbell has an emotional intelligence. Michelle, Dr. Denton, we're all in this helping field. We assume we have emotional intelligence, but ask me to do math and I'll fail every day. And that's okay, like hard math. And that doesn't mean that I'm not brilliant, right? So everybody's different. Mr.
Yeah, I think that a lot of times the I can guarantee you your child will do well at CXC. I can guarantee you. Sometimes we overthink it and we allow our fears that they won't do well to cause us to be a bit of a slave driver. I'm pretty sure you're not a slave driver. Um, Also, and this is to piggyback on what Raiza introduced about the different kinds of intelligences. A lot of times our children are not motivated by what we want them to be motivated by. And so what you could do maybe is to help him find his area of interest, help him figure out what motivates him. And a quick anecdote here. So a parent in the same distress brought her son to me. This boy wanted to be a pilot and he was interested in geography and physics and nothing else. He couldn't see how social studies and English literature would help him as a pilot. He couldn't see that. So what I tried to help them do is to figure out how these other subject areas would come in to help me. So one of the things we did was we went to the Embry-Riddle flight school website. We looked at some interviews with trainee pilots and what they were learning at school. And when he saw that, he was like, oh my gosh, I got to catch up. And so find out what interests your child, find out what drives your child, and see how you could tie in the academic work as something that would help him lay the foundation for what he really wants to do.
Thank you, Will. Yeah, and the thing is, every child is going to be unique and different. Like I said, I had dyslexia, dyscalculia, but here I am today, right? Because the reality is, I don't need math other than counting my receipts that y'all give me. That's it. And my taxes I give to the tax man, right? A part of growing up and maturing is also, and we do it as therapists, which is refer out. I don't need to do this. I will find someone who can, and I will continue focusing on what I do well, right? Because I want to do what I do well, right? Any other questions, comments? I see the chat is going cray. We addressed that. Good, fabulous. If that is all, I want to thank you all for being here and participating and asking great questions and real questions and giving me a run for my money in the chat with some of those questions, which are very heavy weighted. And that's always the challenge when we're doing these talks, is that we can only give so much information. I always don't want us to make us look like I always fear that it makes therapists look kind of dafty. But the reality is we can't give full proper advice without knowing the full picture of any one person's case. And so by all means, I would like to thank everybody. This is my information. My email number. This also has WhatsApp. I should have mentioned that. And yeah, I hope that this information was helpful. I hope that we all learned something. I hope I did not trigger people. I probably should have given a trigger warning at the beginning of this. Oops. And I hope that if it is that you have discovered that maybe you did suffer from child emotional abuse or CEN, that you do seek out support. We do have some psychologists, and even on the Anira page, we have other resources there as well. I'm very happy to pass on clients to Will and Michelle and my other colleagues. Have a great day and enjoy the rest of the conference for the next 2 days. Yes? All right. Have a good day. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you so much, Raiza. It was a wonderful presentation and very engaging session. I'm pretty sure everybody enjoyed it a lot. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Thank you so much.